All right, we're gonna go ahead and rebuild a Mazda G series transmission from a Ford ZX2. This is the G5MR. It's a 5-speed, and we just took one apart. It's sitting down there, and we are gonna see if we can salvage any good parts off of it. We had a kind of a roached case on the other one. It did have an M-Factory diff in it, which is nice. It had the upgraded 03 fork. These are all things that I'll talk about when we take this one apart, but we're gonna see if we can get this apart and maybe do like kind of how-to so that other people can fix their transmissions. So are you guys ready? All right, so the first thing that comes off is this top cap. It's just held on by a few 10mm screws. Be careful with these because they can snap. So just kind of make sure you're not using like a big heavy impact on them, and just taking it easy. So go ahead and pop those off real quick. All right, so we got all those off, and then we just use a pry bar to kind of pop the RTV seal off on here. It's just some, vinyl RTV that holds this plate on. It is okay to kind of tap. You want to tap kind of upwards so you don't mar the mating surface. Once you break the seal, it comes off pretty easy. There's gonna be fluid everywhere. So this gear set matches the gear set from the other one. So in the Ford ZX2 transmission, there were some transmissions that came with a shorter shaft here, and it doesn't have this yoke. The internal mechanism on the synchronizers is slightly different, with a couple of different metal plates instead of tabs and springs, which we'll show you. We want to make sure all this gets cleaned out nice. It looks like there's some water in here too. So when you're taking this apart, just make sure everything's nice and clean. This little plastic tab breaks off pretty easily, so just kind of make sure you're handling it real carefully. If that does break off, it's not going to be the end of the world. You can still run the transmission with it. I've been running without one for probably about a decade or more, but why not keep it as minty fresh as possible? All right, so before we can take the top cap of the transmission off, we have to take these two nuts off in order to get this 5th gear assembly out. To do this, we're going to be popping these, so you can see there's like a indentation on the shaft. We're going to have to pop those indentations out. Use impact on these. As you try to screw these off, it's just going to spin the transmission. So using impact will kind of get those off a little easier. If you cannot get them off that way, if you put something very soft like a shop rag. I would not recommend one of the disposable ones, like an actual cloth rag. If you put them in between the gears there, it'll wedge them enough to kind of keep them from turning, and I have gotten those off with hand tools before. So to get these indentations out, I've actually created a little tool to do it, if I can find it. You can use like a really thin screwdriver, but you don't want to ruin your screwdrivers. So I just created this out of some bar stock, just took it on a bench grinder, and we just kind of get in there behind the nut. I've already boogered this one up. Let me see if I've got another one. I made about a dozen of them when I made them. Yeah, that one looks like it's never been taken apart. Aha! Brand new. All right. So we're just going to get in here and get between the shaft and the nut to push the indentation of the nut out. All right, we got the nuts off. It took a lot of effort, but we got them. So we just used some impacts, an impact to get that off. Now when you take these off, you've got a spacer here, you've got your 5th gear down here. These just slide on and off. This whole unit slides on and off as well, all the way down here to the gear. Just as one unit. You want to keep the fork on there too. You start disassembling this stuff, I'll show you what you're up against. You've got this little copper ring here, and under the copper ring you have 3 little tabs held in by a clock spring. There's one of these on the top and there's one of these on the bottom. If those pop out, they're a real pain to get back together. The other thing is you've got 3 grooves on the top here. That signifies that it is the top of this gear. If you flip this synchronizer over, there's 2 gears that go, or 2 grooves that go across from one side to the other like an equal sign. That, you know, is the bottom. So if this does come apart on you, you know, you could at least put it back together. But I like to try to keep it all as one. Now this fork is held in by a roll pin here. So let me get my punch. So, oh, I've got one here. I've got my punch here, and we're just going to push this in. And there it fell out. We'll just keep that roll pin with the rest of the bolts. And then this whole unit will slide up and out. I'm not too worried about that part, but you want to keep the fork and the synchros and everything kind of together. You just kind of keep pushing and pulling if it binds on the shaft. And there is a bearing in here too, you don't want to forget about. That goes inside the 5th gear. So I'll show you this, those 2 grooves that look like an equal sign. That's what the bottom of the synchronizer looks like. And if we take this synchro ring out, you'll see those 3 tabs with another clock spring. So those tabs, if they ever do pop out, they have kind of a funny shape. They're like a rectangle block with like a groove on one side and then grooves on the edges on the other side. So it kind of steps up on one side and then it goes up like a relief, the opposite on the other side. The relief in the middle goes to the clock spring, and then the reliefs on the sides go outwards when you put that back together. I might do a separate little video on that one day with spare parts I have laying around. And then the smooth bearing side of the 5th gear goes in there. And there's our 5th gear assembly. And we'll keep that with this. Everything's so slick. This part that sticks out is the part that goes down. And I'll do a reassembly video on this as well. So the upper half now is held on by all of these bolts on the side around the edge. We also have a switch right here. This is the reverse gear switch that turns on your reverse lights. We have this bolt right here that is just a cap with a spring and a ball underneath it. We have this bolt here, which has a shaft on the end of it, and this goes into a collar that keeps the collar from moving up and down, and then the shift forks move up and down around it depending on where the gates allow them to go. And then this bolt over here needs to come out. This holds the reverse idler into place. And that'll make sense once we get this part. So we'll go ahead and take this off. The reverse switch is a 15/16 inch, and it just takes a little tap to get that loose. And then all the perimeter bolts are 14 millimeter. So we can start zipping those off. And then I'll go ahead and get these bolts out. All right, so we'll go ahead and take all those bolts out and set them aside. You do have your 2 longer bolts that go to the engine mount here, the motor mount. All right, so what I took out of here, the one with the conical shape, that one is the one for the engine idler. The one with the pin on it, that's the one over here by the diff that goes on the shift collar. And then we'll take this off, which is the, not exactly sure what it does. I know there's a spring and a ball on the other end. So I know something slides into a place, like into a groove. Sorry. These gloves are great until they get slick. Awesome. Here we go. And like I said, this is just a cap. It's not really a bolt that holds anything together. It shouldn't be torqued down that tight. Just enough to create a seal. All right, so it's a real stubby, just a little cap. And then we have a magnet here. We're gonna fish out our spring. There's our spring. And fish out our little ball bearing. There it is. All right, so now we're ready to pop the case. There's several places around the case. If you look at these standoffs here, that's for pounding it back into place, but there are a few little grooves around here where you can pop that seal. Now this is just held on by RTV, just like the top of the case. Where'd my other spot go? There we go. We're just going to carefully slide the case up. All right, so here's our gear set. We'll just need to get all this RTV. This is all the Ford OEM RTV, so it's not too sloppy on there. We'll need to get all that out. One of the things I can see already is it looks like this diff has been pretty abused because I've got chunks of gears on the magnet. So I'll put this on the blue so you can see it. Just big chunks of gears. And that's typically from inside the differential. We'll pull that out and I'll show you. This magnet right here, it's a circle magnet. This collects all those gears and you see how much stuff is on there. Tons of little pieces of gears. And those are probably from the spider gears inside the differential. So it's a good thing we got that M factory differential on standby. That'll be going in. If this case looks better, we'll use the case. So that little ball with the spring, it goes right on top of here in this groove. And this is your reverse gear. So the reverse gear comes up. It's a straight cut gear, it doesn't have synchronizers. And here's where that conical bolt went. So when we do put this back together, we'll have to make sure that's oriented in the right direction. And we can just take that right out. That's the reverse gear right there. To take the shafts out, we're going to have to take out this shaft right here. This is the one that engages fifth gear in reverse. And then this is the shaft that engages gears 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. A lot of times if you have a broken shift fork, this is the fork right here. We'll get it out and I'll show you the difference between the old style and the new style fork. There is a newer updated one that doesn't break as easily. So we'll go ahead and finish just basically gutting this thing. First we'll need a 10 millimeter right here to take this bolt off. I think you got it right there. Okay. Yep. And then this shaft just slides up and out, and then that collar comes out with it. I like to try to keep these together. And we'll just set that aside. We'll clean everything up real well too. All right, so now we've got that out of the way. This entire gear shaft can come up after we remove this this yoke. This yoke transmits forward and backward and side-to-side rocking energy from your shifter, which you can see there's a little shaft down there, into up and down movement and a little bit of rocking side-to-side movement on this shaft as well. To get this yoke out, we just pull this pin, and sometimes you need pliers. There's an orange handle pair right there. Just pull straight up on that pin. And on the back side, you can push toward yourself. Sometimes you need to get a little leverage on it. Okay. And then there is a small groove with an O-ring on this pin. There's the O-ring, so we'll use that pin. The other one had RTV instead of an O-ring. And then here's that yoke. So then our shift selector is down there, and we'll be able to see that a little better once we get the diff out. So this whole assembly I like to take out as one. You just pick it straight up. When you do that, there is a spring and a ball right here. On the assembly video, I'll show you why that's important. But basically, when you pull this thing out, that ball is going to shoot out, and it's going to be down there. Just remember to fish it out with a magnet and set it aside. Make sure you don't lose that spring as well. There's two ways to do this. I'm going to show you the way that I always do it. If it gets too frustrating, I'll show you the other way. But that's one of the more frustrating parts of reassembling. So let's go ahead and get the gear shafts out. I'm just going to kind of cradle it. I'm grabbing the forks, and I'm just kind of lifting straight up. Oh, we've got the thrust bearing on there, the throwout bearing on the other side. So we're just going to rock the transmission up here. We forgot to take the throwout bearing off. That just pulls straight off. Yeah, there you go. Okay, now the gear set should come straight out for us. There we go. So what we were hanging up on there, we'll see, is this vent tube. It just connects to the outside right here. There's a little gasket underneath that, and then just a little chamber. There's nothing to worry about. You don't need to get in there and clean that out. Under here, you've got a bearing race. You got a bearing race here, and then you've got a little cup that supplies oil into the inside of the hollow shaft, and you've got an axle seal right here. This is where, or not an axle seal, this is for the, it actually seals right here. So that is for the input shaft into the engine. Our axle seals will be over here. And then here is a stock differential, and you can see the chewed up teeth on the spider gears in there. So we're not going to assemble the transmission with this. We're going to put an M factory in, but I will show you why it's important if you ever do reassemble with a stock differential. You'll need to put something into the axle to keep these gears from rocking back and forth like this. If they rock too far, they pop out of place. And then you got to take the transmission all the way apart again. Those fall out of place a lot when you're putting the transmission back in the car. So these side gears usually don't have much chew on them, but I've always joked that the spider gears in here are made out of Play-Doh, and you can see why. They are just completely destroyed. A lot of that comes from just time, you know, abuse of the car too, doing burnouts. Any kind of shock to the transmission will definitely do that. So, all right. That's pretty much disassembly. I guess I'll show you one more thing on the video too. This is your H pattern. This is called a detent plate. So your transmission, you know, your shifter attaches to the with a U-joint on the end over here in the shaft. And then this is neutral. You can see the little tab in the middle going back and forth. So then we would go, let's see, toward and to the right. That'd be first gear, second gear, and then you come back, and you can kind of see how there's a shape to them, to where if you came straight back, you would go out a second and into third. There's kind of a taper to that. So when you are in reverse, it actually pushes this little notch over here, this lever. Sometimes these levers break, sometimes the spring comes off. This is a reverse gear lockout. Right now I'm in reverse, so if I were to come over here and go into fifth gear, see how that lever snapped back into place, it's not going to allow me to go into reverse. I would have to come into neutral and then go back, and now I can get into reverse. That just keeps you from thinking you have a sixth gear and going from 5 to R. So those have broken in the past on cars I've seen. As long as you're not trying to, you know, I drive a 6-speed car and a 5-speed car, so there are times where I try to reach a 6th gear in my 5-speed and it's just not there. So just beware of that. But that's basically the disassembly of the G5MR. It's a Mazda transmission. They put it in a Ford Escort, the Mazda Protege, and a few others. And that ball that I told you about, I watched it go into this little well. So I'm going to fish that out with a magnet. And then I'll do a reassembly video here in just a little bit.